The first thing Vivian Hartwell handed Eli Turner was not a key. It was a warning. The papers were already signed. The county transfer stamp was still fresh. And the old 1960s roadside gas station behind them looked like every bad decision a desperate man could make. The canopy sagged over two empty pump islands. The office window was boarded from the inside. Weeds grew through cracks in the concrete where cars had once lined up for fuel. Oil changes. And coffee in paper cups. Inside the service bay, an old in-ground hydraulic lift sat frozen under dust. Its steel deck stained dark from decades of oil. Vivian looked at it the way rich people look at things they have already decided not to save. Eli stood beside his 8-year-old daughter Maya and held the deed with both hands. He was 39, a single father, and a mechanic who had spent the last year renting the back bay of a tire shop that smelled like rubber and unpaid bills. His lease was ending in 30 days. The rent had gone up 3 months earlier. Every time he unlocked that borrowed bay, he felt the clock counting down on the only work he had left. The gas station had cost him $2,000, which was almost everything in the envelope he kept taped under the bottom drawer of his tool chest. It was not a dream purchase. It was a last chance with a leaking roof. Vivian Hartwell had arrived for the handoff in a black sedan with 2 executives and a county witness standing nearby. She was 42, elegant, controlled, and used to speaking as if the world were a boardroom. Her company, Hartwell Motors and Heritage, was preparing a museum partnership built around her family's racing legacy. And the old station was one of several forgotten properties her team wanted clean from the records. To Vivian, the building was not history. It was liability. Back taxes, code violations, roof damage, cleanup orders, and a service bay nobody had inspected properly in years. She had sold it as is because keeping it cost more than admitting it existed. Maya stood close to Eli's side, holding a small enamel gas station key tag she had found on the dusty office counter when Marin Wells, the county code officer, let them look inside before the papers were finalized. The tag was chipped blue and white, shaped like a tiny shield, with a rusted ring through the top. Maya had decided it was the key to their new beginning. Even though the real keys were on a plain metal loop in Vivian's hand, she rubbed the enamel with her thumb as Vivian looked at the building and smiled. "Congratulations, Mr. Turner," Vivian said. "You just bought a $2,000 graveyard with pumps." One of her executives laughed. Another tried not to, which was worse because Maya noticed. Eli felt his daughter's shoulder press into his leg. He did not look down, because if he saw her face in that moment, he might say something he could not take back. Vivian extended the keys. 30 days before the next code review. The roof, the bay doors, the concrete hazards, the remaining debris. All of it is your responsibility now. Eli took the keys calmly. "I understand." Vivian looked past him into the service bay. "Do you? Because most men who buy trouble call it opportunity until the bill arrives." Maya whispered. "Dad, did we buy a place nobody wanted because nobody wanted us either?" The words were small, but they cut through the air harder than Vivian's insult. Eli crouched beside her, the deed still folded in one hand. "No," he said softly. "We bought a place nobody looked at carefully." Maya looked toward the broken pumps. "It looks dead." Eli glanced into the service bay, and that was when he noticed the lift deck. The old hydraulic lift sat just a little too high, maybe an inch and a half above where the floor line should have been. Most people would never see it. Eli did. "Sometimes dead places are just locked," he said. "If you have ever watched someone laugh at the only chance a father could afford, stay with this story. Tell me where you are listening from." Because that closed gas station was not just an old roof, cracked concrete, and broken pumps. Under its service lift was the part of Vivian Hartwell's family history she had spent her whole life trying to control without ever knowing where it was buried. Vivian left with her executives after reminding Eli that Hartwell Motors would accept no responsibility for any hazard, injury, or discovered contamination beyond what was listed in the as-is transfer. Maren Wells remained a few minutes longer, checking the county file on her tablet. She was 34, practical, tired-eyed, and not unkind. "You know this place is going to cost money before it makes any," she said. Eli looked at the canopy, then the bay door. "I know, the tanks were removed and capped years ago. But the building still has open code issues. Don't start tearing into things without permits." Eli nodded. "I don't tear into anything without pictures first." Maren studied him for a second, then gave him a card. "Call before you open anything structural." That evening, after Vivian's sedan was gone and the road quieted down, Eli and Maya began with the office. They swept mouse droppings, stacked old receipt books, and opened drawers that stuck from humidity. Maya placed the enamel key tag on the counter while she wiped dust from a cracked glass candy jar. Eli found faded service stickers, brittle maps, and a rusted bell that had once chimed when customers drove over an air hose. Everything smelled like mildew, old paper, and a building that had been left alone too long. Yet beneath the sadness, Eli felt something else. A station is not like a house. It remembers work. Every stain has direction. Every bolt has a reason. Every change in the floor tells you someone needed the building to do something different. The service bay was worse and more interesting. One overhead door was stuck halfway. A cabinet leaned against the wall with 3 drawers missing. The hydraulic lift controls were inside a metal box coated in dust and spider webs. Eli opened the cabinet carefully and found a lockout tag tucked behind the handle. Old and yellowed, the kind used in race shops and industrial bays when a lift or fixture was not to be operated under any circumstances. It was not a county tag. It was not a gas station service tag. It had been cut from thicker cardstock and tied with safety wire, not string. Eli did not remove it. He photographed it. Maya watched from the office doorway. "Is that bad?" she asked. Eli angled his flashlight over the control box. "It means someone wanted this lift left alone." Because it's broken, Eli looked at the lift deck again. Maybe. He walked around the lift slowly, studying the edge plate. The bolts under the lip were not standard service station hardware. They were heavy, cleanly spaced, and older than the dust made them look. Race shop grade, the kind used when something had to hold weight without shifting. He tapped the concrete with the handle of a screwdriver, solid near the bay door, hollow near the left side of the lift, solid again near the wall. He stopped tapping and listened. Maya stepped closer, holding the enamel tag again. "Dad, is the floor empty?" Eli almost answered no, but Rachel's voice came back to him before he spoke. His wife had died in 2021, 5 years earlier, after a winter that seemed to take warmth out of every room. Rachel used to tell him, when he was ready to give up on a seized cabinet or locked storage door, "A locked door is not the same thing as an empty room." Eli had not said that sentence out loud in years. Now, standing in a dead gas station his daughter feared they had bought because nobody wanted them, he heard it as clearly as if Rachel were leaning in the doorway. "I don't know yet," he told Maya. "But locked and empty aren't the same." He spent the next hour documenting instead of digging. Photos of the lift deck, photos of the bolt pattern, photos of the control cabinet and old lockout tag, short video of the hollow sound under the concrete. He measured the deck height twice, then a third time, comparing it to the old installation marks on the wall. The lift had not shifted randomly. It had been altered. Something beneath it had been sealed, supported, and hidden with enough care that 50 years of dust had not fully erased the intention. When Eli knelt near the rear seam of the lift plate, he caught a smell that did not belong in a damp, abandoned station. Oil paper, old preservation wrap, faint, Dry. Protected. The next morning, Eli called Marin before touching the lift again. She sounded surprised he had listened. By noon, she stood in the bay wearing work boots, holding a clipboard, and frowning at the photos Eli had printed. "You think there's a void under the lift?" she asked. "I think there's a sealed pit chamber," Eli said, "and I think someone modified it for storage." Marin looked skeptical, which Eli did not mind. Skeptical was safer than excited. "If you open this and the floor shifts, it's on you." Eli nodded. "That's why you're here. I want it witnessed and recorded." Marin's expression softened slightly. "Most people call me after they've already broken something." Eli looked at the lift. "I can't afford to break the only chance I bought." Together, they cleared the lift edges. Maya sat on a stool near the office with a bottle of water and strict instructions to stay back. Eli loosened only the first access strip, then paused to photograph the fasteners. Marin recorded on her phone. The strip resisted, then came up with a dry metallic groan. Beneath it was not dirt, not rubble, not a random storage void. There was a steel bracket, painted black under the dust, with an old welded tab and a partial stamped mark. Eli lowered his flashlight. "Haba by Mwihai." The rest disappeared beneath a layer of aged wrapping and the shadow of the lift frame. Marin stopped recording for half a second, then started again when she realized what she had done. "What is that?" Maya asked from the stool. Eli did not answer immediately. Hartwell H3 was a name he knew from old racing magazines and restoration forums. A short-lived prototype program from the early 70s. A family legend wrapped in arguments, missing records, and the story of Arthur Hartwell, Vivian's father, who had been blamed for losing a chassis during the collapse of the program. Eli looked at the partial stamp again. Hesters, working up by my high. His pulse slowed. Not because he was calm, but because the world sometimes becomes very quiet when it is about to change. "Do not open anymore," Marin said. Eli nodded. "I agree." That answer surprised her. "You agree, if this is what I think it might be. I want someone who knows Hartwell race shop work." Marin lowered her phone. "You know someone?" Eli hesitated, then thought of a name he had seen in old restoration credits and forum interviews. Gideon Price, retired Hartwell race shop foreman. One of the last living men who had worked under Arthur Hartwell. Eli had never met him, but he had once rebuilt a gearbox for a man who had Gideon's number. By evening, after 3 calls and 1 long explanation, Gideon agreed to come the next day. He told Eli not to touch another bolt. Gideon Price arrived in an old pickup with a thermos in the cup holder and a cane resting across the passenger seat. He was 71, thin but strong in the way old shop men often are, with hands that still looked capable of tightening bolts by feel. He walked into the gas station expecting disappointment. Eli could see it on his face. Men had probably called him for decades, claiming to have found lost Hartwell history in barns, sheds, and family rumors. Most of them had found nothing but wishful thinking. Gideon looked at Eli. Then Marin. Then Maya. And finally the lift. "Show me what you found," he said. Eli showed him the photos first. Gideon appreciated that. He took the papers without comment and studied the lift height, the bolt pattern, the lockout tag, and the partial bracket stamp. Then he stepped into the bay and lowered himself carefully beside the open access strip. Eli offered a knee pad. Gideon waved it off, then accepted it 5 seconds later with a grunt. He angled the flashlight under the lift plate. For a moment, nothing in his face changed. Then he saw the bracket. His mouth tightened. He leaned closer. His fingers hovered over the welded tab without touching it. "Who opened this?" he asked. "I did," Eli said. "With Marin recording. We stopped when we saw the stamp." Gideon looked at him then. and the suspicion in his eyes shifted into something like respect. Good. Vivian's name had not been spoken since Gideon arrived. But her presence filled the room anyway. Hartwell was on the old race stories, on the station records, on the shame wrapped around the H3 program. Gideon looked back under the lift. That cradle was not built for service work, he said quietly. That was built in Hartwell's race shop. The room went silent. Not dramatic silence. Not the kind with music behind it. Real silence. The kind where a child stops swinging her feet from a stool because she knows the adults have found something bigger than they expected. Maren lowered her clipboard. Eli heard a car pass on the road outside. Then the old building settling above them. Gideon stayed on one knee, staring into the narrow opening like he was looking through a crack in time. "Mr. Price," Eli asked. "Is it part of the H3 program?" Gideon closed his eyes for a moment. "I can't say that from one bracket." He opened them again. "But I can say this. Nobody opens that chamber until Vivian Hartwell is present. The county witness is recording. And every inch is documented." Maya slipped off the stool and walked to Eli's side, still holding the enamel key tag. "Dad," she whispered. "Did we buy a mistake?" Eli looked at the broken pumps outside. The dusty bay. The old lift guarding its secret. And the retired foreman who suddenly looked like a man standing in front of a ghost. "No," he said. "I think we bought the room nobody opened." Gideon rose slowly with Eli's help. His voice was rough when he spoke again. "Call Vivian. Tell her Gideon Price is standing in the old station, and she needs to come see what her family left under the lift." Vivian Hartwell returned to the old gas station the next morning with 2 executives, 1 attorney, and the look of a woman who had already decided the truth should have asked permission before appearing. Her black sedan stopped beside the cracked pump island where weeds leaned in the wind. And for the first time since the sale, she did not look at the building like a joke. She looked at it like a threat. Eli Turner stood near the service bay door with Maya beside him, the small enamel gas station key tag resting in her hand. Gideon Price waited inside by the old hydraulic lift, leaning on his cane. Maren Wells had arrived early with a county camera, a clipboard, and the same careful expression she had worn before anything under the lift became important. Vivian stepped into the bay without greeting Eli. Her eyes went straight to the access strip Eli had opened. Then to Gideon. "You told my assistant this involved Hartwell property." Gideon did not move. "I told your assistant it involved Hartwell history." Vivian's attorney shifted forward. "Any artifact connected to Hartwell Motors may be subject to claim." Eli reached into his folder and took out a certified copy of the recorded transfer. The property was sold as is, fixtures and abandoned contents included. Vivian looked at the paper, then at him. "You bought a building with code violations. Mr. Turner, you did not buy my family's legacy." Eli kept his voice calm. "I didn't know your family's legacy was under the lift when you sold it to me." That line landed harder than he intended. Vivian's mouth tightened, but she did not answer. Maren did. "For the record, the deed transfer is valid. The station, fixtures, and abandoned contents are included. If a historically significant artifact is discovered, final rights and transfer compensation may require legal review. But nobody removes or opens anything without documentation." Vivian turned to her. "You are a code officer, not a judge." Maren nodded. "Correct. That is why I'm preserving the chain of custody instead of deciding ownership." Gideon looked at Eli with approval in his eyes. The old foreman liked practical people. He trusted records more than speeches. Vivian walked around the lift, studying the dusty deck and the exposed bracket with the partial H3 and a -72 stamp. For just a second, Eli saw something in her face that was not arrogance. Fear. Not fear of losing money. Fear of an old family wound opening in front of witnesses. Arthur Hartwell. Her father, They had died with people whispering that he had lost the second H-3 chassis during the 1972 program collapse. Vivian had built her adult life around controlling the Hartwell story. Polishing it, cataloging it, making it useful. Now the one building she had sold as trash was holding a chapter she had never read. Her attorney spoke quietly in her ear. Vivian nodded once, then turned back to Eli. $25,000. She said, "We reverse the transfer today. You walk away with more than 10 times what you paid. And my company assumes all liability for the site." Maya looked up at Eli quickly. $25,000 sounded enormous to a child who had watched her father stretch grocery money. Eli thought of the roof, the cleanup orders, the tire shop lease ending in less than a month. Then he thought of Vivian laughing in front of Maya and calling this place a graveyard. "No," he said. Vivian's expression cooled. 100,000. The number filled the bay like a machine starting up. Even Marin's pen stopped moving for a moment. Eli felt the pressure of it. $100,000 could have saved the shop without the station. It could have paid debts, replaced tools, given Maya stability. But it would also let Vivian close the bay, move the Discovery, and decide what the world heard next. Eli looked at Gideon. The old man gave no signal. He only waited to see what kind of man Eli was when the easy door opened. Eli folded the deed copy and put it back in his folder. Not without legal review, independent witnesses, and a public record of what is under that lift. Vivian stared at him. "You think you can lecture me about public record?" Eli looked around the old service bay, at the cracked concrete and water-stained ceiling. "No. I think somebody built this floor like it was guarding a secret. I'm not selling the secret before we know who it was protecting." Gideon's hand tightened around his cane. Vivian heard it. They all did. Her eyes moved to the access strip again. And for the first time, she did not tell them to stop. She only said, "Open it." The controlled inspection took nearly an hour before the chamber itself was visible. Eli did not pry or rush. He worked under Gideon's direction while Marin recorded and Vivian's attorney documented from the side. The lift controls remained locked out. The deck was supported with temporary braces before any plate was removed. Every bolt came out into a labeled tray. Every photo included a reference marker. It was slow, careful, and nothing like treasure hunting. The old gas station seemed to hold its breath while the men and women inside finally treated it like a witness instead of a wreck. When the second plate lifted free, the smell of oil paper rose from below. Dry and faint after decades of waiting, Maya stood safely near the office doorway, clutching the enamel key tag with both hands. Eli angled his flashlight into the chamber. At first, he saw only darkness. Then the shape of a welded cradle. Then the long curve of bare tubular metal wrapped at the stress points, in age bisectinise. It was not a complete race car. There was no engine, no wheels, no shining bodywork, no miracle machine ready to roll into the sunlight. It was a chassis, stripped and silent, held in a cradle beneath an old hydraulic lift like a secret built out of steel. Gideon lowered himself slowly to one knee. His face changed as the light moved across the frame. "There," he said, pointing with a trembling finger. "Crossmember." Eli adjusted the beam. Dust covered the metal, but the stamp was visible beneath it. Hey 3,2 do, A. H. C. Hi. Vivian took one step closer, then stopped. A. H. She said, almost under her breath. Gideon answered without looking at her. "Arthur Hartwell." The bay went still. Maya looked from the chassis to Vivian, understanding only that the woman who had laughed yesterday suddenly looked like someone had taken the ground from under her. Vivian shook her head once. "That could be any mark." Gideon's voice was gentle, which made it harder to dismiss. "No, it could not." He pointed to the front left weld cluster. Arthur had us reinforce the C2 chassis after the Riverside test because the board wanted the H3 program killed and the second chassis scrapped. See that double pass I made the first weld ugly? And Arthur made me grind half of it back. I cursed him for 2 days. Gideon gave a faint, sad smile. That is my ugly weld under his correction. He pointed again. And those are Hartwell race shop cradle plates. We built them in the old experimental bay before the locks changed. Vivian's attorney began to speak. But Vivian lifted one hand and stopped him. She was staring at the chassis now, and the mask she had worn so well had begun to crack. My father was blamed for losing it. Gideon nodded. He was. The board said he let it disappear. Gideon turned toward her fully. The board wanted it gone. They wanted every trace of C2 destroyed because it proved Arthur had been right about the chassis geometry. And they had killed the program anyway. Vivian looked at the steel frame under the lift. Why would he hide it here? Gideon's eyes moved around the old station. Because this place was still trusted then. Off-books repairs. Late-night test parts. Men who knew how to keep quiet when rich people wanted truth erased. Vivian's face had gone pale. Eli saw the child inside the Billionaire for the first time. The daughter who had grown up under a story that made her father smaller than he was. Gideon leaned on his cane and stood. His voice filled the bay. Not loud, but final. Your father did not lose it. Vivian. He protected it. The words silenced everyone. The executives. The attorney. Marin with her camera. Eli. Even Maya stopped turning the enamel key tag in her fingers. Outside, a truck passed on the road. But inside the station, the old service bay became a chapel for a truth that had waited 54 years to be spoken. Vivian did not cry. She was too practiced for that. Nor too proud. But her eyes shone. And when she looked at Eli, the contempt was gone. In its place was something more complicated and harder to watch. I sold this to you, she said. Eli nodded. Yes. I mocked you for buying it. He did not soften the truth for her. Yes. She looked back into the chamber, and my father's name was under the floor. Gideon said, because nobody in your company cared to look under the floor. That was the second blade. Vivian accepted it in silence. By afternoon, the Hartwell Heritage Foundation had been notified, and the station was sealed under a temporary preservation order agreed to by the county. Eli's attorney, and Hartwell's legal team. No one removed the chassis that day. That mattered to Eli. The old station had held it safely for decades. Another 24 hours would not hurt. Vivian's museum partnership was paused pending independent review. Her planned launch, built around a clean version of Hartwell history, could not proceed while the most important missing artifact was sitting under a lift in a building she had sold for $2,000. The business consequences arrived in polished language. But they were consequences all the same. Hartwell's board required an independent provenance panel. The foundation suspended Vivian's exclusive narrative control over the H3 exhibit. A public correction had to be drafted, stating that Arthur Hartwell had not carelessly lost the C2 chassis, and that newly discovered evidence suggested he had preserved it during an internal purge of the 1972 race program. Vivian signed the correction herself. Eli did not see her sign it, but Gideon did. And later he told Eli that her hand shook only once. The legal settlement took weeks, because real discoveries do not end when people stop gasping. They move through title searches, fixture language, artifact review, preservation law, tax advice, and lawyers who charge by the hour to define words like abandoned and attached. Eli hired counsel before signing anything. Marin provided the transfer record and chain of custody documentation. Gideon gave sworn testimony about the cradle, welts, shop marks, and Arthur's role. The final structure was cleaner than Eli expected. The Hartwell Heritage Foundation would pay $2.2 million for artifact rights and preservation access, pending final review. While Eli kept ownership of the station, he would also receive a long-term paid contract to restore the service bay as a public heritage workshop connected to the H3 exhibit. Vivian came to the station one more time before the agreement was announced. She arrived without executives. No attorney walked beside her. She stood outside the open bay door while Eli was sweeping dust from the office threshold and Maya sorted old screws into jars. "Mr. Turner," Vivian said. Eli turned. "Ms. Hartwell." She looked at Maya. Then at the enamel key tag on the counter. "I owe your daughter an apology." Maya froze. Vivian stepped closer, careful not to make the moment too grand. "I laughed at a place your father was trying to save. I was wrong." Maya looked at Eli first. He nodded slightly. Maya said, "You laughed before you looked." Vivian absorbed it. "Yes," she said. "I did." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Vivian looked into the service bay, where the lift was still braced and the chamber sealed under temporary panels. "I spent years trying to protect my father's name by controlling everything around it," she said. "I never thought the truth might be in a place I was ashamed to own." Eli leaned the broom against the wall. "Shame makes people stop checking rooms." Vivian looked at him. "Your wife said that Eli was surprised she knew." "Not exactly." He glanced toward Maya. "Rachel used to say a locked door isn't the same thing as an empty room." Vivian nodded slowly, as if the sentence had found a place to sit. Months later, the dead station was no longer dead. The canopy had been repaired. The broken pump islands cleaned and preserved as display pieces, and the office window replaced. The sign out front read Turner Service and Restoration, painted in deep blue letters with a small heritage plaque beside the door. The old hydraulic lift was no longer used for daily repair. It had been cleaned, stabilized, and partly enclosed behind safety glass, with the chamber beneath it lit softly so visitors could see where the H3 chassis had rested. Eli kept 2 working bays open for real customers, because he had never wanted a museum instead of a shop. He wanted a place that still fixed things. Maya hung the small enamel gas station key tag on a hook near the office door the day the station reopened. She had polished it only enough to bring back the blue around the chipped edges, not enough to erase the scratches. Eli watched her stand on tiptoe and clip it carefully beside the new keys. "There," she said. "Now it knows it belongs here." Eli smiled. The roof no longer leaked. The lights no longer flickered. The borrowed bay behind the tire shop was empty now, cleaned out and returned before the lease deadline. For the first time in months, Eli did not feel like his life was being packed into boxes. That evening, after the last visitor left and the road outside turned gold with sunset, Maya stood beside the preserved lift and looked through the glass at the softly lit chamber. "Dad," she asked, "why did Ms. Hartwell sell the station if her father's truth was inside?" Eli stood beside her, hands in his pockets, thinking of Vivian, Arthur, Gideon, Rachel, and all the rooms people stop opening because they are afraid of what they might find. Because sometimes people run from shame so long they forget truth might be waiting in the same place. He said. Maya leaned against him. "But you looked." Eli put an arm around her shoulders. "We looked." Maya reached into her pocket and touched the enamel tag, even though its place was already on the hook. "Mom would have liked this station," she said. Eli looked around the repaired bay, the preserved lift, the old concrete that still held stains from lives before theirs. "Yes," he said. "She would have told me not to call a locked room empty." Maya smiled a little. She was right. Eli looked through the glass at the lift that had guarded a secret, then at his daughter, who had watched him buy a place everyone else called dead and turn it into a beginning. She usually was. The station lights glowed against the evening. Cars passed on the road. Some slowing now, not because the building was abandoned, but because it was alive again. Eli did not become a different man after the settlement. He still opened early. He still wiped his hands before signing school papers. He still checked old bolts before trusting new paint. But when people came into Turner Service and Restoration and asked how a $2,000 gas station became part of Hartwell history, Eli never told it like a treasure story. He told it like a lesson. A locked door is not the same thing as an empty room. A dead place may only be waiting for someone patient enough to listen. And sometimes, the floor beneath your feet is guarding the truth someone else was too proud to find.